Hey guys, this is Fernando doing another video for More Survivalists. In the previous video I talked a little bit about the boleadoras or bolas, which are traditional South American weapons. In this video I'm going to be talking about traditional South American or specifically Creole knives. These are some of the typical Creole knives that I have in my collection. These are generally called Facone knives. Try to keep it as accurate as possible. A Facone knife, which is often used, the word Facone is basically used for making reference to any Creole knife or South American knife. It really would just be these three. These three would be real Facone knives. The Facone has a little bit of a longer blade, all right? It has a cross piece and more of a dagger-shaped blade. The Facone was intended mostly to be used as a weapon, even though the gaucho use it for pretty much everything else as well. The gaucho is the South American equivalent of the cowboy. The knife was to the gaucho what the revolver was for the cowboy, even more so. In the American West, the cowboy used revolvers, but it didn't have, even cowboys didn't have that link to its weapon like gauchos did. For the gaucho, the knife was absolutely everything. Gauchos would, real gauchos, not what you see these days when traveling to South America, a guy dressed up, but the real gaucho guy would be someone that lived most of the time in the wilderness. He would just build a shelter under a tree, live there, or roam around with his horse. I mean, he had his knife and he had his horse. That was basically it, and very little else besides those two. That was what the gaucho had in terms of material possessions. So that was why it was very important for him. It wasn't just that. The knife for the gaucho was everything. It's what he used for getting food, cleaning, opening up game, preparing food, cooking. It was what he used for building shelter. It was what he used to defend himself against both men and beasts. It was what he used for fun as well. It was what he used to end the life of a loved one that was suffering. It was used for absolutely everything. And what I mean by this, for example, if a gaucho had a little bit of time left after working or after being employed or getting together in a pulperia, which is like a general store / bar, they would maybe play a little bit of throwing knives, like instead of throwing darts, throwing knives and see who got the best score. If it was a matter of honor to be settled, they would duel with knives as well. If there was a loved one, someone that was suffering, terminally ill, it was the gaucho himself who ended the suffering. It was called like taking away the misery, all right, of the person that was in that condition. So everything basically revolved around knives. And the way in which knives were made, they would just use anything they would have. A broken sword would be used so as to make a facone, a machete, bayonets, anything would be used for making facone knives. Then you have verijero knives, which are this sort of smaller knives. Abel Domenech, which is maybe one of the few true experts in this field, he defines them as Creole daggers, puñal criollo. Even though it's many times called facone, even in Argentina you would go and they say, yes, you have a facone. No, it's really not a facone. A facone would be one of these. This is a verijero knife. The verijero, it was called that way because it was carried in the front of your body, tucked in the belt with these clips or a leather flap, like in this case, or even on the back of your body if it was a facone. The facone would usually be carried across the back in the belt, tucked like that. This one would go in the front. In this case, the steel would be made these blades would be made using better steel. If it wasn't a piece of broken knife, in general it was blades made specifically for that, like this one. This one was made in Tandil, as it says there. Tandil, Atahualpa. Atahualpa, it's an okay brand of carbon steel. Industria Argentina, made in Argentina. The traditional way in which these knives were made, as you see, it's basically, there's really nothing strange to it. It's a full flat ground, still kind of narrow, but with a very sharp tip. It's really not that different from a traditional cooking knife. It has a narrow tang, goes across the metal handle. These blades were either made locally, or some of the finer ones, they would come from Germany. The Solingen blades were actually pretty much sought after. The Tree brand was one of the better brands you could go for. And the blades with the narrow tang would be sent over to South America, and over there, depending on the price you could afford, you would get one with bone, or with a metal handle like this one, or even a precious metal handle if using gold or silver. The handle is filled with hot tar, and once that's done, the blade is inserted, and the narrow tang is actually like a stick tang. It's very thin. If it's not well made, the button here, if it's not well made, it actually breaks kind of easily. So the narrow tang goes all the way, comes to this end. Here it has a little cap for maybe aesthetics reasons, and then it's hammered into place. Once the tar cools down, the blade is ready to use. Why did they do it this way? Because these knives were actually used a lot. And what happens when a knife is used a lot, it usually ends up wearing out, or it even breaks. So if they would be using the knife and the tip would break, or they actually wear down the blade of so much use, what you could do is heat up the handle so as to soften the tar on the inside, cut the button there, and pull it out, and replace it with a new blade, and you would still have your precious metal handle and a scabbard. So that would be like the traditional method in which these were made. This is all typical techniques. Is the kind of knife you would be finding rather easily in South America and in Argentina. Another Verijero knife, this one with a leather sheath. Yeah, this one doesn't even have a brand, but it's a classic construction. This is Ñandú bone. Ñandú is like an ostrich, like a big two-legged bird, which was traditionally hunted with bolas or boleadoras that I was showing you guys before. This is actually a pretty nice, handy little knife. See, the stick tang goes all the way through, hammered into place there. And in this case, no, you don't have tar on the inside. They'd probably use some sort of glue there. It's not intended. It's a cheap little knife. I mean, well made and all, but still a knife that no one is going to be missing it if it breaks. This type of metal is it's very commonly used, same as here. This is called alpaca. It has a little bit of silver, but it's mostly nickel. So it's very shiny, but it's also not expensive, cheap, and used frequently for these knives. Straight cross piece, a traditional facon blade. For facones, it will usually be, again, broken swords, bayonets, machetes, or later on, in more modern times, blades specifically made for facones. Again, Atahualpa, Tandil, made in Argentina. Okay, carbon steel. This is actually pretty sharp, and you could actually prepare food okay, especially if you're in a grill and you need more distance. This would work okay. The gaucho would use his facon for everything, but in general he would also have a smaller knife, which makes sense for someone that uses tools and knives a lot. He wouldn't have just one knife. If he could have one, probably he would have preferred a bigger one. And in general, they would keep the second, especially the tip, would be kept very, very sharp, here sharp, but not so sharp here, where he would just choke on the blade like that if he needed to do like more detailed work. Being handy, grabbing it like that, he would be using like that. A gaucho wouldn't use plates or forks or anything like that. He would just kill an animal, a cow, whatever it is that he got, put it on the fire pit, and when the meat was cooked, just cut off chunks and strips of meat, bites one piece of meat, and with a knife, being careful not to cut his own lips, would just cut the meat like that with a knife straight out of his mouth and bite into that was left on the inside. The sheath is, in this case, it's a combination of alpaca and leather. It has some reinforcements on the inside, but this is a nice facon knife, pretty traditional construction. Doesn't rattle, doesn't do anything, nice knife. This is a little bit of a bigger, a wider facon. Also, here they're using a bone handle, brass, and S-shaped cross piece. The sheath is a functional, cheap, just a piece of leather, and with this tab there for keeping it in place in the belt. Very old blade. It has some inscriptions, but I don't know how truthful these are. It says Sheffield, England, somewhere there. I don't know if you get to see it. And here it says, again, England, 1867. This may have been scratched. Apparently, based on the research I did, this would be most likely a trade knife. Trade knives would be cheaper blades that they would make and end up using for trading in North and South America. There's also a chance that this was a bigger farm blade. Not exactly sure. I found it doing a little bit of research. I found one that has this pretty much this exact same stamping, which looks pretty crude, but it would be the same stamping, and it would be a working blade that was a little bit bigger and had like more of a cleaver type of shape. Not exactly what that was for, but it would fall in lines of what would typically happen for making a facon knife. They would just scrap any piece of metal they would find, any piece of steel, and just put a handle into it and make a blade. Actually pretty handy big knife this one is. Has obviously lots of wear and such, lots of pitting as well, but yeah, still holding on. Finally, I have what is probably one of my most prized possessions in terms of knives and such, which is this facon. This one was, it's modern. It was made a few years ago, and I remember when the guy making this facon was actually uploading the pictures of how he was making it online. He was making it for kind of a rich guy, and this is all pure silver everywhere. Silver handle, silver cross piece shaped like legs of a horse, and silver here as well, everywhere. So this guy was making this facon for this rich guy in one of the provinces. I think it was Salta, maybe, something like that. Ends up that the guy, I was, drooling all over this, and a few years later, while looking one of these like Craigslist type of thing in Argentina, it's called Mercado Libre, kind of like Craigslist, where you buy used stuff and such. And looking for some old used knives to see if I scored anything good, I saw this knife, and then when I saw those little legs, I knew it was that same knife. I mean, there was no chance of it being, anything else. So I contacted the guy. Turns out that the guy the knife had been made for ended up going broke or having financial problems, or I think he lost it in a bet, maybe, or something crazy like that. The thing is that it ended up going on sale online and going on auction, and I really got it for very, very, very cheap in comparison to what it would cost if you asked someone to make such a knife for you. Again, same kind of construction. In this case, traditional Facone methods of construction. This is an old machete blade. This is Legítimo Collins. This is from an old Collins machete. Now, if you get to see that from an old Collins machete, but this is all great stuff. This is all lots and lots of work. Empty wax method for constructing that cross piece there, and the button there on the back in case the blade breaks and needs to be replaced. That's how you would be doing it. Nice knife. Nice knife. One of probably my favorite knife. Probably the one that would be the hardest or even impossible to replace. So I take good care of it. So folks, that's all for now. Just a little bit of talking about traditional Argentine and South American knives, facones, verijeros, and that sort of thing. Folks, take care. Have a great day. Remember to subscribe, and see you in our next video.